Firstly, I'd like to wish condolences to Tanya and Nicolette and on the passing of their father, Julian Levin, and I'd like to send condolences to Jean, Julian's wife, and please God, may the learning that we do, both in terms of the halacha and the Gemara share to follow, be an aliyah for his neshama. I've known
Amen.
Julian for over a quarter of a century, and just a very, very sad loss. And Kev, can you teach us the halacha?
Okay, so congenial speech and a smiling face. So it says here, effective communication between people involves more than the exchange of words. The meaning of words is affected by various factors, including tone, accentuation, facial expression, and hand gestures. Thus, the phrase, give me the money, can be modulated to mean a request, a demand, or even a threat. Aware of the impact that a tone can make, the Rambam advised his son to make it a habit to always speak calmly to everyone and at all times. This will rescue you from anger. And this is from Igeret Rambam. Speaking calmly entails many elements, including not raising one's voice, using a pleasant tone while articulating words in a steady pace, maintaining a placid facial expression, and gentle hand movements appropriate to the message. Shlomo HaMelech says in Kohelet, chapter 9, verse 17, the gentle words of the wise are heard above the shouts of a ruler of fools, over fools. In explaining this verse, the Al-Sheikh notes that the words that are spoken calmly and softly are more likely to be listened to. The Ramchal in Mesilat Yesharim, chapter 29, concurs. It says, our sages said in Yoma 86a that a person's speech should always be congenial with other people. His words must be words of respect and not words of disdain. And so it says in Mishlei, he who derides his friend lacks a heart. Okay.
Thanks, Kev. All right. Just going to do a revision for a few minutes and then we're ready to go. So if you remember yesterday in the 74th daf of Bava Kamma, the Gemara addresses the Mishnah's first ruling that where only one witness testified to the slaughter or sale, the thief is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payments. And the Gemara asks, if the fact that he slaughtered or sold the stolen animal was established by the testimony of only one witness, then it's obvious that he's not liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, because, guys, we've always learned in legal cases that you need at least two witnesses in order to convict. So why does the Mishnah feel it necessary to teach us the obvious? So the Gemara answers that the Mishnah is actually teaching us something a little bit deeper here. So establishing the slaughter or sale of the stolen animal by his own admission is comparable to establishing it by the testimony of one witness. In other words, just as in the case where the slaughter or sale is established by one witness, when another witness subsequently comes and joins him, the thief becomes liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. In other words, a single witness doesn't jeopardize the case going forward. And I mean, we even learned in the 30th daf of Sanhedrin with Rav Simcha Steinhauer that if obviously a witness appears and later on a witness appears, both their testimony is taken together, even if it's given on two different time junctures, and it comes enforced with the equivalent of the testimony of two people. So even if there's only one witness in this stage, it counts towards part of the process. It doesn't mean that the thief is exonerated up until the point that a second witness is found. So what does this have to do with the fact by one's own admission? It says basically, just as in the case where the slaughter or sale is established by one witness, when another witness subsequently comes and joins with him, the thief becomes liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. So too, in the case where the slaughter or sale is established by the thief's own admission, if witnesses subsequently come to testify about the slaughter or sale, the thief becomes liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. So that serves to exclude that we learned yesterday, that which Rav Huna said in the name of Rav. Because Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, if one admits to being liable to a fine, and witnesses then come and testify to his guilt, he's not liable to pay the fine. Okay? In other words, according to Rav, one doesn't pay a fine by his own admission. And he even carries it a step further and says that not only does not admitting to a fine not make one liable for payment, it even absolves him from the fine. Whereas the general consensus is that it might not make him liable to the penalty part, but certainly to the principal. And if witnesses come later, he has to actually pay the penalty aspect as well. So that was covered yesterday. Further to which, if you remember, the Gemara yesterday digressed to discuss this issue where Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, if one admits to being liable to a fine and witnesses then come and testify to his guilt, he is not liable to pay the fine. So, you've got that Rav Huna example that exonerates a defendant by his own admission, that protects him against even witnesses coming later. But Rav Chisda is not of that view, as well as Shmuel. And Rav Chisda challenged Rav Huna because he said, listen, there was an incident involving Rabban Gamliel who blinded the eye of Tavi, his slave, and was rejoicing greatly because obviously it was an accident. He didn't mean to blind the eye of his slave, but he obviously wanted to free Tavi. And since that incident occurred as an accident, if this was an opportunity in order to free a slave, he was able to do so, because if you remember in Leviticus Vayikra chapter 25 verse 46, there's an injunction that says you shall subjugate them forever, and that's in the 38th daf of Gittin. Okay, so obviously when he blinded Tavi's eye, he's got the opportunity to make Tavi a free man. I'm not sure what their relationship was like, but obviously Tavi was an exception to the rule of how the Canaanites behaved. So he found Rav Yeshua and said to him, look, did you not know that my slave Tavi went free? Rav Yeshua said to him, why? So Rabban Gamliel said to him, because I blinded his eye. And Rav Yeshua said to him, look, there's nothing of substance in your words, for he has no witnesses. In other words, and you don't become liable to a fine by your own admission. So since the obligation to free a slave for blinding his eye is only a fine, and there are no witnesses attesting to the incident, he cannot be freed. Okay? So there was a bit of a pickle here in this case. So Rav Yeshua's reply basically implies, guys, I'm just putting my phone on silence. It's actually aggravating me. I'm sorry. I thought it was on airplane mode. Apologies. So Rav Yeshua's reply implies, but if he had witnesses who would come by and testify to the incident, Rabban Gamliel would be liable to free him, even though Rabban Gamliel had already admitted to inflicting the injury before the witnesses testified in court. So what's this a proof for, guys? And we learn from this that if one admits to being liable to a fine and witnesses then come and testify to his guilt, he's liable to the fine. So what we are seeing here is a stark contrast between Rav Chisda on the one hand and Rav Huna, who's defending Rav, on the other hand. So as far as Rav Chisda is concerned, this is a proof that should witnesses come after the court incident where the person admitted to their own guilt in court, then in that particular case, they're not free of the obligation to pay the fine. It's only before witnesses come. So Rav Huna doesn't accept that as a challenge. He said, look, generally one who admits to a fine is exempt, even if witnesses come later and testify to the fine. The case involving Rabban Gamliel is different because he didn't admit the fine in front of the court. In other words, his admission didn't exempt him in this case, and if witnesses would come, he'd be liable. Because this was done outside of the court. He was obviously had a good relationship with Rav Yeshua, so it was an informal discussion. So the Gemara counters to this and says, why, he most certainly did admit it before the court, as Rav Yeshua was the president of the court. In other words, what the Gemara is countering is that why would he just bring it up to him as a conversation that you'd have between two mates? The entire reason he brought it up to him was the fact that he wanted it to be official, and obligate him to free a slave. So the Gemara answers, Rav Yeshua was standing outside the court at the time. In other words, when Rabban Gamliel related to Rav Yeshua that he had blinded Tavi's eye, the court was not in session, and Rav Yeshua was not in the courthouse. Rather, he met him in the street, and it was there that he made the confession. So his confession didn't constitute an admission before the court that would exempt him from the fine in the event that witnesses would come forth later. So the two opinions are that if he'd have actually admitted it in front of the court, it would have meant afterwards that he would have been obligated had witnesses appeared. So since there was no confession, there was a problem. The other opinion would be is that even if he did confess in front of the court, the witnesses wouldn't have any bearing on whether or not he was exonerated, because he automatically would be. So before we have this issue, I just want to ask you, Kevin, do you understand the two opinions, and what are they? I'd ask Arthur, but he's riding his bike.
The one I know, well, I can't give them both to you, but the one says the guy admits guilt before, then he doesn't have to pay the fine. He doesn't have to pay. I can't give it over, no.
Okay, so just remember two lines. Okay, and it's pretty much this simple. You've got Rav Huna that agrees with Rav, and both of them are saying that if witnesses come later, the person that admits to the fine is still exempt either way. And Rav Chisda that basically says, according to many other opinions, that if a person admits to the particular guilt, then what happens afterwards is that they're off the hook for the fine aspect, but not for the principal aspect. However, if witnesses come later, they are obligated to pay the full fine. And what is that based on? In the beginning of this particular Mishnah, where it says that you can't incriminate because of one witness, both in terms of one witness against you and somebody testifying and incriminating themselves. But the minute there are two witnesses, that's strong enough to convict, despite an admission. Okay, so that's the general idea that we're dealing with yesterday. Now, obviously, Rav's not going according to our particular Mishnah's general opinion. So the Gemara is now, this is the part at which we're starting today. So the Gemara retorts, but it was taught in a brisa. Rav Yeshua said to him, there's nothing of substance in your words, for you have already admitted, implying that Rabban Gamliel could not become liable to free Tavi, even if witnesses would come later to testify. In other words, he's actually cooked he got himself into trouble, because in essence, he was actually trying to get his slave freed by admitting to it. But the problem is, if there were no witnesses, and this is going according to, Rav, his admission has gotten him off the hook permanently, whether witnesses come later or not. That's the issue of the problem. So that's implying that Rabban Gamliel could not become liable to free Tavi, even if the witnesses would come late and testify. Is not then this ruling of Rav Huna in the name of Rav the point of dispute between the Tanaim, between these two brisos? Okay, so guys, basically you've got this Tana, the Tana of the first brisa, who quoted Rav Yeshua saying, you have no witnesses. And that holds that if one admits to being liable to a fine, and witnesses then come and testify to his guilt, he is liable to pay the fine. That's the Tana of the first brisa. Whereas the Tana of the second brisa is quoting Rav Yeshua saying, if you already admitted to it, and in that particular case, witnesses come and testify to his guilt, he's not liable to pay the fine. In other words, what they're saying is those are the two different interpretations of Rav Yeshua. Does that make sense? Gav, can you give it over in brief? Just the two.
I can't give it over with names. I just can't, not tonight. But I can probably give you over the gist of it. So I think it's in the first brisa that you if you admit to if on your own admission, if you admit to something, right, and there's a penalty associated with it, and witnesses come later, then no, they can incriminate. You're also hooked then on that one, on the first one.
No.
The second
The opposite. According to very good, but it's the opposite. According to the first brisa, if you admit to being liable to a fine and witnesses then come and testify to his guilt, he's liable to pay for the fine. But the ton of the second brisa says what?
The ton of the second brisa, it's the other way around. So if you admit to it, and people come afterwards, then you off the hook.
Exactly. Then you're not liable.
That's from Rava and Kahuna. I don't know. Rava and who else is the other guy?
So Rav Huna holds like Rav, who says the minute you admit to a fine, even if witnesses come later, you're off the hook. Rav Chista said that you don't have to pay the fine unless witnesses come, then you have to pay the fine. Okay.
Yeah.
So that
we also learned at the beginning of Bava Kamma, you remember, that was very strong. You spent quite a bit of time on it. That if you, on your own admission, if you return the ox or the cow, whatever you stole, you didn't have to pay a fine. Just saying, we covered it right at the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, so firstly, at the very beginning, we didn't go into the details of whether or not one pays the actual principal amount or not. We're going to go through all of that, but we did touch on it, absolutely. We just didn't learn all the opinions, so now we are. So basically, the Gemara is asking, is this the basis of the argument? Is that the root of the dispute between the Tanoim? And the Gemara corrects it. It says, no. That's what we thought up until now. It might be that everybody, in other words, both brises, agree that if one admits to being liable to a fine, and then witnesses come and testify to his guilt, he's not liable to pay the fine as ruled by Rav. And it's about this that they argue. This Tana, from the first brisa, quotes Rav Yeshua as saying, for you have no witnesses, holds that Rav Yeshua was outside the court when Rabban Gamliel admitted before him that he injured Tavi. In other words, so his confession doesn't actually constitute an admission before the court, because it was in an informal discussion, and that would have exempted him from the fine if witnesses were to come later. Okay. Whereas the Tana of the second brisa, who quotes Rav Yeshua as saying, for you have already admitted, holds that Rav Yeshua was in court and presiding over the court when Rabban Gamliel admitted before him that he'd injured Tavi. So his confession did constitute an admission that exempts him from the fine, even if witnesses to come later. So the discussion at this point is, if it was in court, it would seem to hold like Rav, that he's off the hook permanently. And if it wasn't in court, he could be convicted because he never admitted in an official capacity, and so witnesses could come and convict him and allow him to release his slave, which he wanted to do in any event. So the Gemara continues its discussion with respect to one who admits a fine, and then witnesses come and testify to his guilt. So it was stated concerning one who admits to being liable to a fine and witnesses then come and testify to his guilt, Rav said that he's exempt, but Shmuel says that he's liable. So, Gavin, we're back to that liability of Shmuel and Rav. So the Gemara is going to give a source for Rav's ruling. Rav Ba'ahilai said, what is Rav's reason? Because he expounds the verse. If you remember, there was in Shmot chapter 22, verse 3 in Exodus, if being found will it be found, the theft he shall pay twofold. So you interpret it as follows, according to Rav Ba'ahilai. If the theft is found, when we say it's found, what does it mean? It's revealed what was stolen through testimony. So it was revealed through witnesses, then it would be found by judges that he's liable to the twofold payment. So if you found guilty by judges, it means that excludes a case where one incriminates himself, according to Rav. So why do I need the exposition to teach that one who admits to a fine is not liable to pay? Because you can derive it from the verse, whom the judge has found guilty shall pay twofold to his fellow. And if you say that the judge is found guilty, it's obviously not one who incriminates himself, because you make yourself guilty in that case. Okay, not by your own admission. So according to Rav, learn from this that if one admits to being liable to a fine, and witnesses then come and testify to his guilt, he's not liable to pay the fine. Shmuel doesn't interpret it like that as well. He would say to you that that verse, if being found, will it be found, is needed for an actual thief to teach that a twofold payment applies, not only to a custodian who claims theft, but to an actual thief as well, as taught in the Bryce of the Academy of Chizkiah. So what it's saying is Shmuel is coming to tell you that that verse teaches you something else. We would think that a custodian, if you remember, Gavin, we learned before that a custodian actually can be a thief, but he acquires it legally. Because what happens is you give it to the custodian to look after your thing, and you say to him, where's my laptop? I'm back from Australia. He said, what laptop? What are you talking about? What laptop? So therefore it entered his hands legally, and then at that point he started getting cute, and he kept the laptop. So that becomes a thief, but you handed it over legally. It wasn't taken without your permission. But what Shmuel does is he says, just like in that case, if the custodian feels bad and he admits it, he's not liable to pay the fine, but only if witnesses come later. He said that an actual thief has the same benefit. You would think that maybe a thief is held more stringently than a custodian who lies, but both of them are actually thieves according to Shmuel, which means it's entitled to the same benefit. If he comes back, he feels bad, and he doesn't trouble the court, he can pay the principal but not the double payment. So we learn the same thing. So it's coming to teach that a thief is treated as leniently as a custodian who initially acquired it legally, because they both end up being thieves, and then they both have a chance to clear their conscience. Okay, so Rav challenges Shmuel's position from one who admits to a fine is liable if witnesses come later. Okay, and he used the following brisa. If a thief saw witnesses approaching to testify against him in court, and he said preemptively before the court, because obviously guys now he's in trouble. He sees these witnesses coming, he knows they're going to testify against him. And he says, look, why? Because Kevin, he doesn't want to pay the twofold payment. He certainly, if it's an ox or sheep, doesn't want to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. So he quickly runs to the court, said, I did wrong, I stole. But that's not sincere confession. That's trying to get off by not being clapped with penalties and only paying a principal. So if a thief saw witnesses approaching to testify against him in court, and he said preemptively before the court, I stole the animal, but I did not subsequently slaughter or sell it, he pays only the principal, but not the additional fine payments. So evidently, one who admits to a fine is exempt, even if witnesses testify to his guilt afterwards. Okay, so what is this coming to teach you? That the Gemara basically speaks of a case where a thief didn't admit to slaughtering or selling the animal, to teach that even in that case is exempt from the 4-fold or 5-fold payment when witnesses later come and testify that he did slaughter or sell the animal. He's exempt. Why? Because the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for the slaughter or sale includes the 2-fold payment for the theft. Now, because he admitted to the theft, he's exempt from the 2-fold payment, which is a fine. So he only has to pay technically the principal. So if we held him liable for the sale or slaughter, which he didn't admit to, and later witnesses testified to, he'd only pay a 3-fold payment for the sheep or a 4-fold for an ox. But the Torah doesn't speak about half payments or half provisions. So basically, he came right by paying the principal back. So this is how Shmuel responds to Rav's framing of the issue. What are we dealing with here in the Brisa? He's saying with the case in which the witnesses turned around and did not come to testify. In other words, he's not saying that witnesses never came at all, because then the ruling that he's exempt would be obvious. So rather, Shmuel means to explain that the Brisa refers to where the witnesses to the theft turned back and did not testify. But Guys, there were witnesses to the slaughter or sale, and they did come to testify. So if the theft witnesses didn't come to testify, and the slaughter or sale witnesses did come to testify, if he's exempt from the kefil payment because there are no witnesses, he can't be rendered liable for the additional payments for the slaughter or sale, because if there's no witnesses that testify to the theft, there can be no liability for the slaughter or sale, because it could be your animal you're slaughtering or selling. So as far as that's concerned, that's his particular argument. Now, the Gemara rejects it. He said, but from if you look at the wording of the Brisa, it states in the latter part, Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, says, let the witnesses come and testify. And they're testifying after the thief's admission, and then they render him liable to the fine. So it's implied that the actual Tana Kamma of the Brisa holds that even if they come and testify, the thief won't be liable to the fine, as ruled by Rav. So if you look at the wording. So now Shmuel says to Rav, is there not Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, who stands on the issue, as do I? Why I say it's the same as Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, says. So what we're finding here is, okay, they're granted that the Tana Kamma holds, as Rav does, that admitting to a fine absolves one, even if witnesses subsequently testify to the fine. Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, disputes this and maintains that he's liable if witnesses testify later to his guilt, and I follow his ruling on the matter. That's what Shmuel says. So when we learn about the Tana Kamma, we learn that that's the anonymous majority opinion. So it seems to go with Rav, whereas Shmuel holds by the lone opinion of Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, that if witnesses come later, you are obligated. So the Gemara obviously comments and says, now according to Shmuel, the issue is certainly a matter of Tanaic dispute, because now Shmuel is forced to concede that his opinion is not held by the majority opinion, the Tana Kamma, because the Tana Kamma rules that one's admission absolves him from a fine, even when that admission was made because of his fear of the approaching witnesses. So it doesn't even have to be genuine. It has to just be that he preempted the witnesses that were going to convict him. So obviously, guys, in this case, the Tana Kamma would rule that an admission that absolves him where he volunteered, he will certainly be allowed to be off the hook as far as the penalties are concerned, or the fines. So, in other words, if the Tana Kamma says even under duress, he comes to confess because he doesn't want to be nabbed by the witnesses. In a case where he voluntarily comes and there's no witnesses approaching him on the way to the court, in that case, for sure, he's exonerated from any future fines, but not for the principal matter. That's a different issue. We're going to discuss that. But according to Rav, we must also say it's a matter of Tanaic dispute. Maybe we think, according to Rav, it's not so clear. So Gemara says, not necessarily. Rav could say to you, in other words, there's an opinion of Rav, and then there's an opinion of Shmuel that says Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, agrees with Shmuel. So the answer is that, well, then he doesn't agree with Rav. So the Gemara is saying, well, not necessarily, because you could view it like this. Even what Rav says could accord with Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon. So how is that possible? Because he's basically said that so far, Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, has not said there more than that thief's admission does not absolve him from the fine, since he did not admit to it on his own, but only because of his fear of the approaching witnesses. So what does it mean? If you have a case of insincere confession or admission of guilt, does Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, rule that he is not absolved and must pay the fine if witnesses subsequently testify against him? So what Rav is saying is, basically, according to Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, in a case where the only reason the thief admitted to the fine, to the penalty and not have to pay the fine, is he knew he was under pressure, but it wasn't a sincere confession. So in that case, if witnesses came later, obviously he'd have to pay further fine because that's not a sincere confession. So in that case, Rav doesn't disagree with Shmuel either. But he's saying, in my dispute with Shmuel here, where the thief admitted on his own to the fine, without any duress or pressure, even Rav Elazar, the son of Rav Shimon, concedes that the thief would remain exempt, even if witnesses subsequently came and testified to his guilt. Okay, does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, because you want to not trouble the court, so there's no incentive if you're going to have to still pay the penalty later.
Exactly. That's exactly. The court is already troubled in this case, so all he did was try and circumvent it. He wasn't really sorry, and therefore doesn't form a kapora for him either, Gavin. Not only did he trouble the court, but it doesn't really form a kapora because he just didn't want to pay more. So it doesn't help him on a spiritual level either. So, Kevin, the Gemara qualifies Rav's ruling. Rav Hamnuna said, it seems reasonable that Rav's ruling was stated with respect to where the thief said, I stole. Okay? And witnesses then testified that he stole. So in that case, Rav ruled that he's exempt from the fine, even though witnesses came and testified later, because with his admission, he made himself liable to the principal. So in other words, in this case, his admitting to the theft constitutes admitting a liability, and therefore it makes him liable to pay the principal. So Rav's not actually saying, according to this interpretation of Rav Hamnuna, that there's no payment at all. All he's saying is there's no penalty payment. He still has to pay the principal because it's deemed a bona fide admission. How do we know it's a bona fide admission? Because he wasn't having witnesses on his tail, and it cost him money. That's how you know it's bona fide. So it effects an exemption from paying the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payment later if witnesses come and testify, because he's already made good. He returned what he stole, so that's fair. But if the thief said, I didn't steal, and witnesses came and testified that he stole, and then he said, I slaughtered or I sold, then the witnesses came and testified that he slaughtered or sold, he's liable, for he exempted himself from paying anything. So what it's saying there is, when he had a chance to do the right thing, he denied it. All of a sudden, as far as the slaughtering or selling is concerned, he learned this rule that if you admit to a fine, you're exempt. But that doesn't constitute a bona fide admission, because he didn't even agree to pay the principal or agree to the fact that he stole anything. So if witnesses come late and testify to his guilt, now he has to pay the fine because he didn't pay the principal or come along and admit to anything. So there's no kapora, there's no sort of commitment, there's no payment. So then he's liable to all the penalties as well as the principal. Okay. So I tell you what, guys, I think we've got 5 minutes left. Let me just see if I've got a minute or so. All right, guys, I think I'm happy to end off on this note.
Scott, that was good. Kevin?
I'm just trying to think if I want to ask you a question. Just going back to the last point that you made, that the thief had an opportunity to admit that he stole, but he only admitted to the theft and the slaughter. Is that what you said?
No, I said if he had an opportunity, if he came without witnesses on his heels and he said, listen, I did wrong, I want to pay the principal, no problem. Any witnesses that came afterwards, he's indemnified from paying any sort of fine, because it actually cost him. And he wasn't under any sort of pressure where witnesses would catch him out. That's a sincere confession, and the principle is enough. But if witnesses are on his heels,
if he knows they're going to, he wants to get in first, it's like to save money. It's not like it's not insincere.
Correct. It's insincere. Or it says a case where there were no witnesses after him, but he goes to the court, says, I make a statement that I didn't steal, and then afterwards the witnesses that said he not only stole that's animal, and he thinks he's off the hook because he's not off the hook, because he didn't even agree to pay the principal. He denied having stolen anything at all. So he now thinks, okay, no, I really did sell the animal or slaughter the animal. Then he has to, in essence, pay all the penalties, because that's absolutely insincere.
Is that a false oath? That's a false shwa.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is this court like a Beis Din? It's not a, it's
It
like a
isn't.
civil court.
No. Well, the Beis Din is a civil court. You've got criminal courts and civil courts, and there are 23 judges with death penalty cases, and there are 3 judges with regards to monetary cases. But the Beis Din and Sanhedrin is the same. It's the same thing. It's not like the Beis Din we have now without Sanhedrin. It's still Paskins, but it was during that time, sure.
So it was a religious court. It wasn't like a civil court like you have in South
It wasn't a civil
Africa.
court, no.
It was all like halachically based rulings or...
Exactly. It's all
I wanted to tell you a joke. You were talking about the laptop. So if the guy denied that he stole the laptop, the owner would be hunting for it.
Yeah.
Did you get that one, Gavin?
Yeah.
Hunter Biden, that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The laptop from hell.
I actually saw an interview with a guy that took in the laptop. He said the amount of schmutz he found on that laptop was absolutely terrible.
And this Jewish girl from Cape Town married him about a year or 2 ago.
Yeah, it's shameful. It's sad.
Terrible.
So guys like that, yeah, it's but Damon, what did I want to say to you? It's just I went for a run and I was mentally tired and I was wide awake the whole year. It sometimes doesn't, I don't know, it's miraculously I never dozed off.
It's miraculous I never put you to sleep.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
So stimulating tonight. It was impossible.
I'm tired mentally, but I didn't like doze off.